Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Selig est die Seele, which translates to Blessed truly is he. Well, it's a pretty dense chorale considering how short it is and how compact it is. Very active bass line, lots of paired up eighth notes, so we get some regular subdivision of the harmonic rhythm, but we will just analyze it like we do every other chorale and talk about the interesting quirks and non-normative chord progressions as we get to them. So we'll start things off by looking at the key signature, 1 flat. We start off on D minor, we end on D major, so I reckon we're in the key of D minor. We start off with a passing tone in the bass, and then we have F, D, F, and A. That's D minor in first inversion, so no need to reanalyze, just change the figured bass. And then we get a bit of this bass figure here, step, 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 or just step, step, and then skip back down. And we see that bass figure actually quite a bit in Bach's music, and this chorale in particular sometimes in inversion. And usually it's paired up with a chord being voiced over 2 beats of the harmonic rhythm, and then it gets reinverted, usually to root position. We then have B flat, D, E, and G, and I reckon that instead of looking at this like a, what would it be? It would be like a 2-4-3 chord, like an E minor 7 flat 5 over B flat. I think this D is a suspension over the bass, or not even really a suspension over the bass, because it would be resolving to a dissonance, and that's typically not how they occur, even though we do see them kind of used that way in Bach's music. I think this is a 7-4-2 chord. Actually, this is C sharp diminished over B flat. That's just what it sounds like to me. But, it could be a 2-4-3 chord as well, depending on what comes afterwards, but I think it's more likely for a 7 chord to go to this chord right here, which is a D minor triad again, rather than a 2 chord. We have A, D, D, and F, which is D minor, and interestingly, in second inversion, the 7th still resolves down, but we would expect it to go to 3, not to 1, so we get 1-6-4 here, with a neighbor tone in the bass as well. And as we get ready for the cadence, which is a perfect authentic cadence in D minor, we have a 4-3 suspension here, but this is A, and E. And we see with the resolution, this is just implying a 5 chord. So this is just a 1-6-4-5 style perfect authentic cadence. It resolves on beat 2 of the measure with the passing 7th and the tenor, and then we cadence on D minor, D, F, A, and D. Looking ahead, we have a half cadence in the key of D minor. No modulations throughout the whole first phrase, or the whole first section even, so we're going to stay in D minor the entire time. Starting things off again with a similar start to the beginning of the piece, or the beginning of the chorale. D minor triad here, D, D, F, and A. No need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass, F, D, F, and A. That's another D minor triad, but in first inversion. That then gets turned back in the root position on beat 2 and then we have G, D, F, and B natural, and depending on how you look at this, I'm going to analyze it as a G7 chord, which would be a harmonization of the melodic minor scale, because we have B natural rather than B flat, and that seems intentional, so I'm going to call it a 4-7 chord. He went to the effort of including the F on the harmonic rhythm, therefore it's a 7 chord to me. But you could make the argument that the F is, I don't know, it's not even functioning like a suspension. This kind of looks like an enclosure, like if this F resolved to E flat on the next beat, maybe, but the tenor gets that E flat instead, so maybe there is some interplay going on there. I don't know though, I think that's too complicated for the analysis, but we would expect this to go to some sort of 5 or 7 chord. We have F natural, E flat, G, and C sharp. And if we look at this F as an accented non-chord tone, we have E flat, G, G, and C sharp. Or sorry, I keep on saying E flat. I mean E natural. This is C sharp over E. That is a C sharp diminished triad in first inversion, which is 7-6. And we would expect that to go to 1, F, D, A, and D. D minor in first inversion. Passing tones in the lower voices before we get B flat, E, G, and D. which is, I guess depending on how you look at it, I'm going to say that this, if we look directly on the harmonic rhythm, like literally we have B flat, E, G, and D, and that would be E minor 7 flat 5 over D, which would be another 2-4-3 chord, which we would expect to precede 5, but if we look at this E as an accented non-chord tone, we have B flat, D, G, and D, and that's a 4-6 chord. And the reason why I think it's more likely a 4-6 chord is because 4-6 preceding 5 is a special type of cadence called a Phrygian half cadence, and it's typically in this configuration, but 2-4-3 basically accomplishes the same thing. And if you look literally on the beat of the harmonic rhythm, it's a 2-4-3 chord that occurs. And the important thing is that we have a cadence on 5, which is what a half cadence is, that is preceded by flat 6 going to 5 in the bass. That's what makes it the Phrygian, the flat 2 going down. So both chords achieve the same end goal, right? But it's more common for 4-6 to be the preceding chord, or the first chord in the cadential figure. As we move ahead to the next phrase, the third and last phrase of the A section, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor again. We start off with like an inverted version of the bass figure we have. So we start on F, and then we go back up to F, as opposed to starting on D and then going down to D. So we start off with D minor in first inversion, F, A, and D. Passing tones in the outer voices, D, D, A, and F. So that's just turning the chord into root position that then gets turned into first inversion on the offbeat. So the inversion of the bass actually just flips the chords around, but they're still the same. You can see the comparison between the two of them. And then you have G, D, B, and E, which is E minor 7 flat 5 over G, 2-6-5. Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. This E kind of turns it into root position, but then we get rid of the third, which doesn't matter too much for diminished chords because it's not the third that gives them their sound, it is the fifth. And so long as the fifth is intact, that's really what matters the most. We then go to A major, A, C sharp, A, and E, with a passing seventh in the alto before we cadence on 1, D minor, D, A, F, and D. Okay, looking ahead, we have kind of an interesting phrase here. We have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of F, so there's a modulation at some point, and I think it happens pretty quickly after the beginning of the phrase, but I don't think it happens immediately. So we start off with D, D, F, and A again, so that's another D minor triad, passing tones in the bass and alto, F, D, A, and A, which is just taking the chord and putting it in first inversion. Then we take the chord and re-invert it back to root position on beat 2 and, before we get G, D, A, and B flat. This A is a 9/8 suspension, or this A is a 9/8 suspension figure in the alto, and I really think what's happening here is this G minor is actually 4 in the key of D minor, but I also think it's 2 in the key of F major, and we have kind of an interesting progression after this, because we would expect this to go to some type of like C major chord, or we wouldn't expect it to go to F major, but it does. A, C, F, and A, which is F major in first inversion, our tonic triad. So 2 going to 1, we see it from time to time, but it's fairly uncommon because we typically expect 2 to function as a predominant chord. The only other context in which we see 2 usually in a non-predominant functioning context is when we have 5 following the 2, 3 following the 2, and then we have some adjacent harmony, 2, 3, 4, sometimes continuing on to 5, etc. But here we have a 1/6 chord, which is kind of unusual. Then we have a passing tone in the bass before we get C, C, F, and G. F is a 4/3 suspension over the bass, and what we were really expecting here is a C major chord. This A is a non-chord tone. This A is a non-chord tone. I guess you can kind of say that there's like a 1/6/4 chord happening here, because the A's would turn this chord into C, A, F, and A. This B flat is also a non-chord tone. It's a 7th, like a neighboring 7th, or not even really a neighboring 7th, just a non-chord tone 7th. I think it's called an escape tone, but when it's part of a 16th note figure, I don't really know how relevant it is. But then we have C, B flat, E, and G. The chord turns into 5/7. This G is a chord tone, and then we cadence on 1, F major, F, A, C, and F. And if you look at this 1/6/4 is actually a significant part of the progression. You could add that bracket there, showing the relationship with the 5 chord. Okay, looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor, but this might be the most interesting phrase in the whole chorale actually, because we go via C major, or at least that's what it sounds like to me. You could analyze this whole section in A minor if you wanted to, but this first couple of chords sounds like C major to me. So this F chord right here, F, C, F, and A, I think that's where we modulate to the key of C. That 1 chord is now our 4 chord, passing 7th on the bass. We then get D, D, F, and B natural. That's B diminished over D, which is a 7/6 chord. That's a good sign. This F is a chord tone that kind of turns it into a 6/4 chord, but I think they just enclose the E. We just have a very active bass line here. Like it's continued in the alto, just continuing that unrelenting, that just constant 8th note pulse. That's or that constant 8th note subdivision just in at least one of the voices. Pretty much always. There's always 8th notes going on unless there is a cadence, which is really interesting. It makes this chorale feel very active. Very, very active. But then we go to C major in first inversion, E, E, G, and C, which is a 1/6 chord, so 4/7/1. That's a pretty normative progression. It's like a predominant, dominant, tonic chord progression. We see them all the time. But I think that this C is where we modulate to the key of A minor via our new mediant, C major. Passing tone in the bass. We then have G, C sharp, E, and A. That's A7 over G, which is kind of interesting. That would be A5. Did I say G7? E7 over G. No, I think I said it right. That'd be 5/4/2 in the key of 5/4/2 of 4. We're not in the key of D minor yet. We will be to end the chorale, but we're currently in the key of A minor. So 5/4/2 of 4. And it kind of gets turned into root position here, E, C sharp, E, and A, or more like a 6/4 chord, but still the 7th resolves down by step. If you look at this E as more of like an enclosure rather than like a literal continuation of the line. But then it goes not to where we would expect. It doesn't go to D minor, it actually goes to D major, F sharp, A, and D, which is a harmonization of the melodic minor scale. Then we have G sharp, B, E, and D. So these passing tones right here actually spell out a 5 chord, more specifically a 5/7 chord in first inversion, so 5/6/5, where they keep that D in common. And that goes exactly where we would expect it to, A minor, A, E, and C, our tonic triad. And then again, we have another subdivision of the harmonic rhythm. We have D here. This A is a chord tone. This F is not a chord tone, it's a neighbor tone. And then this B is an anticipation. But if we keep that A as a tone in between these two chords, this turns into B minor 7 flat 5 over D, which would be a 2/6/5 chord. And we know that Bach loves his 2/6/5 chords, especially in anticipation for a cadence, which is what's coming up. We then have E, A, E, and B. This A being a 4/3 suspension over the bass, this F being a neighbor tone, this D being a passing tone. We get the resolution on beat 4 as well, E, G sharp, E, and B. No need to reanalyze because I already put the analysis underneath the suspension. And then we cadence on not 1 minor, but 1 major. And we see these cadences from time to time. They're still a perfect authentic cadence in the same way that the last cadence in a minor chorale is typically one that uses the Picardy third, the major third. So we get a major tonic rather than a minor tonic. But it's less common to see them in the middle of the chorale. However, we know that Bach uses this as a device to repurpose the minor dominant, or the tonic of the minor dominant, to be major so that it is the dominant of the tonic minor. That was like a word twister or something, some type of tongue twister. We're not dealing with a minor dominant here, we're dealing with a major dominant, so it just naturally aligns with the next key, which is D minor, D, F, D, and A. So we end up getting 5/1 rather than minor 5 going to 1. It's more common to see major 5 going to 1. Passing tones in the lower voices as well. We have F, A, D, and D, We're seeing this bass figure again. We also see it in the tenor, step, step, skip in the opposite direction. So that's a 1-6 chord. Then it gets turned into root position again on 4 and, before we get B flat, G, D, and G, the C sharp being a neighbor tone, that is G minor over B flat, that's 4-6, and then we get A, D, and F, that's D minor in second inversion, with a couple of neighbor tones in the lower voices, and an anticipation in the melody. And if you spell this chord, we have E, G, B flat, and D, which is E minor 7 flat 5 in first inversion on the off beat of the harmonic rhythm, 2-6-5. Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. Then we have A, D, and E, another 4-3 suspension, getting ready for the cadence. The C sharp is our resolution right here, and then this B is sort of an ornament or enclosing the C sharp around the D and the B. And then we get A, C sharp, and E, which is the full resolution of the chord, passing 7th in the tenor, and then we cadence, perfect authentic cadence as we would expect at the end of a chorale, on D major, our major tonic with the Picardy third, just like the previous cadence. It's much more common to see it at the end of the chorale though. And that is today's analysis. So pretty interesting. I'd say 2 going to 1's a very unusual progression here. I could also put the bracket underneath these 2 to show the significance between 1-6-4 and 5. They're usually paired together. If we do see a 1-6-4 chord, it's typically with the 5 chord. Other than that, 5 of 4 going to a major 4 is pretty interesting. This Phrygian half cadence is very interesting as well. Is it a 2-4-3 chord? Is it a 4-6 chord? I'll leave that up to you. This 7-4-2 chord is also very interesting. It's actually kind of interesting that the 2-4-3 chords are ambiguous by the tenor as well. It's interesting that these 2 chords kind of don't, it's up for debate as to, what chord is happening here. And the more that I think about it, it might be a 2-4-3 chord because 1-6-4 is basically paired with 5. So you might as well just say 2-4-3 going to 5. That's what this whole bracket is about. But regardless, I'll stick by the analysis. I'll say that there are some other potential things going on that validate my analysis, and I offer varying viewpoints so that you can piece together the analysis that you want, or to show that the music is more than just putting a label on some chords when there is alternative pitch material or opinions. But on that note, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in going along on this journey with me to analyze all of the Bach chorale harmonizations, I upload once a day. Maybe give me a subscription. If you're interested in following along on that journey, you can subscribe, you can hit the notification bell, and you will be notified when I upload, which is once a day. And the time varies, it's just when I have free time. But thank you again so much for supporting the channel by watching this video. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.